Welcome to Crosswords, the podcast about practical Christianity. What does it look like to walk in Jesus' footsteps? How do I live in a culture hostile to godliness? These are questions that we'll answer on each podcast as we get our heart and mind on Jesus. All scriptures quoted are from the New International Version. You can follow me on Twitter at kingdom_saint. Walk with the Lord today and be a blessing. Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to see you here on this first day of the week. And just a reminder, this week we're starting 1 Samuel. But today's message is going to be on a great love story found in the book of Ruth. In the middle of the chaos of the immorality, the godlessness of the time of the judges, we find an oasis of peace, virtue, and promise in the book and in the person of Ruth. It goes to show you there's always a silver lining to be sought and to be expected when we hope in God. At a time when integrity could scarcely be found amongst the leaders of Israel, the seeds of a lineage founded on integrity were taking place. The seeds that led to the birth of the great house of David and also to the Savior, the Messiah, Jesus Christ. God tests our heart to see if we're people of integrity. If we've claimed to trust in the name of Jehovah, God will test us because he needs to see if we are people of integrity. And what does integrity mean anyway? I like C.S. Lewis' quote where he says, integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching. But if you look up the word, the meaning is wholeness, completedness, soundness of moral character, truthful and honest, unable to be bribed or unable to be baited. That's what integrity means. And this book is very, very special to me, not just because of that, but because it kind of reminds me of how I came to court my wife, founded on very similar principles that we see in this book. After failed relationships on my behalf, I was looking for a woman of integrity. But I realized I needed to become a man of integrity first. And I trusted that God used others to point out such a woman for me. I was unable to see her with my own eyes. But later I knew who she was because her reputation and her virtue preceded her. And we're going to find these principles here in the book of Ruth. We're going to look at this in 4 parts in the book of Ruth, how God builds integrity. First, he gives us a setting for integrity, how this should take place in your life. Then decisions that we must make in order to proceed being a people of integrity. Then we'll examine the cost of it. There's always a cost to doing the right thing. Doing the easy thing is sinful because it doesn't involve a cost, but always doing the right thing involves a cost. And finally, the reward for integrity. So let's talk about the setting for integrity first. And we see that in chapter 1 through 5. I'm not going to read all of the verses. You already read the book. But here we see that there's a family living in Bethlehem in Judah. There's a famine, so they decided that they needed to look for greener pastures elsewhere. And the family moved to Moab. But there, unfortunately, Naomi's husband, Elimelech, passes away, and their sons live for another 10 years. They get married to 2 Moabite women. But then the sons die too, so that leaves Naomi alone without her 2 sons and her husband, only with her daughter-in-law. So there's some great tragedies occurring here. I mean, they moved to a different place hoping that things would be better for them, and instead they find disaster. They find death all over the place. So one would conclude that this whole venture of moving to seek for greener pastures was a disaster. One would conclude that, right? So Naomi is like Job's counterpart. Remember Job? She sounds a little like him here in verse 20 and 21 when she's like, hey, don't call me Naomi. That's not my name anymore. Call me Mara. Mara means bitter in Hebrew, because the Almighty has made my life bitter. I went away full. I was full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. So there is a problem here. Naomi is left alone with her two daughters-in-law. And that was a problem back then. You know, let's talk a little bit about the widow's plight in ancient times, because there was no social security. There was no safety net, if you will, for some of these women. We're a bit removed from those kinds of troubles that weighed on Naomi's shoulder. So we need to delve a little bit deeper, because it's important to understand this circumstance, because it's central to the plot of the whole story behind Ruth. We just saw that in the first few verses, she had a devastating situation to those who understood what it meant for her at that time. And Naomi thought she was finished. Said, I'm done. You know, I don't even have a husband. I don't even have a family lineage anymore. I'm done here. But we understand, see, we the readers who know the end of this story, we know God was just getting started. And so that's practical application number one from this book. Sometimes we think we're finished. Sometimes, you know, the door is closed. We see the sign, dead end street. There's nothing to look for here. But that's precisely when God can get started with something in your life. You may think the doors are closed for good on a certain opportunity. You might think an opportunity has been lost forever. Maybe a relationship has ended. And you grieve. We each grieve to varying degrees when we face such things. But these are merely the groundwork to build up your integrity. God starts, it's like a phoenix rising from the ashes. You know, God can build up something great out of the ashes of those kinds of things. And what is God doing? He's testing our character here, because we need character in order to succeed, to establish a good pattern for our life and for those around us. We need to build our character. So what was Naomi's plight? Well, the life of a woman, particularly a widow, back then, revolved around their men. And so girls were protected by their father. Widows survived by the labor of their husbands. Sons would continue providing for their widowed mothers. But Naomi had no such thing left, no such safety net left for her. She didn't have a husband. She didn't have sons who could care for her. All she had were these two young daughters-in-law. So that meant that Naomi would be reduced to begging. And that was what she was facing. I'm going to have to go out and beg now in order to survive. However, there is a provision, I don't know if you remember from Deuteronomy, that provided for people in such a situation, for such disenfranchised individual. I'm not going to read the whole thing right now, but basically the gist of it is, this was a law directed for those who had means, for those who had fields, for example, to harvest. They were told, you know, don't pick every single grain, don't pick every single thing, leave some behind so that the widow, the orphan, the poor could gather it. Your olive trees, don't take every single olive. You know, your fruit trees, don't take every single fruit. Leave some behind for the people who need it, for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. So that was the provision God had given to the Israelites, very different from the nations around them, showing that God really cared for the disenfranchised. We also learn in the New Testament that the widow had a hard time. Remember the widow's mite? Jesus talked about the poor widow who gave a mite 2 copper coins, but she gave everything she had. That just shows how poor the widows were. There were those who had to beg. In Acts 6, chapter 1, we see that there was a collection specifically made for the widows. And the role of the widows, according to 1 Timothy, Paul instructs Timothy how to take care of the widow. So there was a great concern for the widow, for the orphan, for the disenfranchised. So in the midst of all this, in the setting of integrity, now comes forward some decisions that had to be made to show whether or not they were people of integrity or not. So right now we understand, right, Naomi's situation looks pretty bleak, and also for her daughter-in-laws as well, because they were women, and her daughter-in-laws worse. They were foreign women. They were considered idolaters. So they had it even worse than Naomi would have had it. But here, and that's why Naomi tells their daughter-in-laws, look, I'm too old to have another husband. You should go back home. You should go back to your fathers. You're young. You can start all over again. As for me, I'm finished. So you should stay behind. Her daughters were still young enough. They could be married. But Naomi recognized that her time was past and she was too old to start over again. That just shows the downcast position that she had. So yes, Orpah goes home. She kisses her mother-in-law and she says, yeah, okay, I hear you, mom-in-law. I'm going to go and see what else is there for me. But we read here that Ruth clung to her mother-in-law. And in verse 16, we have a declaration that defines the character of this woman, Ruth. She says, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. How well she articulated her loyalty. She shows her loyalty. She shows a desire to look after her mother-in-law, a devotion, not just to her mother-in-law, but even to God, to her people. She had lived with them at least for 10 years from what we know to the text. So she probably saw some qualities in this Jewish family that she did not see in her own family growing up as a Moabite. She realized that the Lord God Yahweh, was a God that was attractive to her. And so she grew up in this family. She was with them for the last 10 years, and she developed a loyalty, a bond with her mother-in-law. So she chooses to care for her mother-in-law over her own instincts of self-preservation. Her courage, her dignity, her integrity, they're unquestionable here. Anybody who looks at this story, they don't have any doubtable motives concerning Ruth, understanding all these difficulties that she was signing up for, that she didn't even understand herself. But we know, this is not a good idea. Even Naomi said, stay, because I know that you're going to have a tough time. But Ruth says, no, I will go with you. Your people shall be my people. Your God should be my God. So in the midst of the time of the judges and all that was going on in Israel, we see a foreigner, an idolater, making the right choice based on love. And God will bless her for that. And that brings us to practical application number 2. When push comes to shove, do you choose integrity or do you choose self-preservation? What is your choice? Because depending on what you will choose, you will be a person of integrity, or you might need to go back to school. We need to recognize, though, first, if God has put us in a position to demonstrate integrity. Because if you recognize that, your faith will follow through, or it will be lacking. But don't misunderstand me. I don't think any of us would blame Orpah, would we? After all, Orpah, she had to make do with what she had. I'm not going to blame anybody for choosing self-preservation, especially in a situation like that. I don't think we can find fault with Orpah. But is the book called Orpah or is it called Ruth? That's what you have to understand. Orpah made her choices and everybody was like, okay, I won't blame you, but that you are not the person that we're looking to imitate them. So even the world recognizes that although we don't blame somebody for making a self-preservation choice, they will not be recorded in the annals of history as someone to be remembered. You will not be a stand-up person if you choose self-preservation over integrity. Even the world agrees with that. You won't be able to stand the gap. You won't stand out. You won't take a stand and deliver, because these require very selfless attitude, and an immense faith to take that step towards the unknown and the possible pain and sorrow that are going to come. We've all had to make choices like that in our life. God has tested our character and our integrity here amongst us family. I know I was told when I was a single high school teacher, shut up about the gospel or get fired. And that was my setting for integrity. I could have chosen self-preservation and remain silent, or be bold and continue and let my faith define what was going to happen next. Also, I had to accept whether I was wrong or not in some people that I had chosen to get married to, and decided to, yeah, you know what? I don't care what you're going to tell me. I don't care what advice you're giving me. I made my choice and I'll live with it. I could have done that and probably be in a very troublesome relationship right now. Probably wouldn't be standing here. Or I could have said, you know what? Let me listen to the people God put in my life. Let me hear what they're saying. They're seeing something I can't see, and they're helping me make the right choice. That's scary, and that's integrity. And usually all these decisions hang on whether or not you're going to wait on the Lord and listen to him, or whether you're going to take it upon yourself to make your decisions regardless of whatever else anybody might tell you, or go ahead and just make them anyway and don't ask anybody. That's another way of doing that. I'm just going to make my choices because I decided, and I don't care what anybody else thinks. Which one do you think has integrity? Which one is shown here in this book of Ruth? Which one is exalted? So that's the groundwork for the decision for integrity. Which one are you going to do? Self-preservation or integrity? But there's a cost to this. That's the one we're going to examine now. There is a cost to this. Ruth didn't exactly know what she had signed up for. All she knew was that she loved her mother-in-law, and she was not going to let this older woman beg and glean the fields and do all this hard work. She's like, look, I don't care if the Israelites don't accept me. I don't care if I'm a foreigner. I love you, Mom, and I'm just going to stick it out with you. Was there any selfishness there? Not at all. It was complete selflessness. And that's what love is, and that's what distinguished her. So there is a cost. You know, here in Ruth chapter 2, verse 2-3, we see her telling Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain. Let me go glean. I'm going to do this for you, Mom, because we have nothing to eat, and nobody is giving us any handouts. So I'm going to go and work. I'm going to go and beg, basically, is what this was about. Time to put up or shut up on her behalf. Time to pay the piper, Ruth. You made the choice of going with your mother-in-law. Now you got to pay up. Integrity is not about talk, but it's about action. She gleaned in the fields of Boaz, picking up the leftover, but not just picking up the leftovers. She then threshed the grain. I don't know if you know what that involves, but it's a hard labor, because after you pick up the wheat, you need to separate the wheat from the chaff. That's called threshing. So that involves a whole other methodology. And then you had to grind the wheat just to make a few loaves of bread. And she probably may have had some left over to sell maybe, and even get money to take care of other things that they needed. So here in Ruth 2:17, we see that she threshed the fields until evening. That means she was a hard worker. She didn't just go pick a few and then went home. She got tired, she rested, and then she went at it again. She did this for 2 to 3 months. See, right choices are not easy to live with. Ruth could have done like Orpah, take refuge in her father's house. But instead, she's doing manual labor in a foreign country with people making fun of her, being vulnerable to strangers. And this is recognized in Boaz. If you read what Boaz says here, he had heard. In other words, Ruth's reputation preceded her. Even before he met her in his field, he had heard about this foreign woman, how she had shown devotion to her mother-in-law and crossed, just the two of them crossed. You know, there were no buses or trains. They had to cross by foot or maybe on a donkey, all the way from Moab back into Bethlehem in a very dangerous journey. And not just that, now she was there with her mother-in-law taking her place gleaning the fields. Boaz was amazed. Her reputation preceded her. He says, I've been told about all that you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. So there were good things being said about Ruth, even though she was a foreigner. And Boaz says in verse 12, may the Lord repay you. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. He also recognized that Ruth had adopted the Lord as her God. She had recognized that she could take refuge under the wings of the Lord. And this impressed Boaz, because we know Boaz also was a man of good reputation. But this just shows us that integrity shines. When you do the right thing, people will hear about it far away. People that you know nothing of, people you don't know, will hear about your love and your integrity. And that would cause a great impression. That gets us to practical application number 3. Talk often goes unnoticed. People talk, and like Mark was saying, that makes for long, boring meetings, right? When it's all talk. But people do notice selfless action. Everybody notices that, even on social media, right? When you go on Instagram or Facebook, it's talk. Most of it talk. You scroll through, talk. But then you might come up to a post that shows integrity. And those are the ones that get a lot of likes. Those are the ones that sometimes turn viral because people recognize, they notice, they're like, wow, look what happened here. People don't respond to talk. They get bored of it, but they do take notice of selfless action. That shows us that integrity requires commitment, a stick-to-itiveness. It's one thing to have said to Naomi, your God will be my God, your people will be my people, where you go, I will go. That sounds beautiful, but if you don't back it up, it's talk. So Ruth knew that now she had to take action, and she did. And Boaz even was hearing about it. Wow, you are a woman of integrity. It's not talk that brings integrity. It's action, selfless action. And that's our part. God is the one who can create a background for integrity, but you're the one that now needs to take the steps. God can set you up, for the volley, boom, for the kill, but you're the one that has to put up. You're the one that has to say, okay, now it's time for me to act on this. You can either rise up from the ashes or burn with the ashes. It's your choice. Sometimes we use prayer. We say, well, I need to pray about it. And there is a point when prayer needs to stop and action needs to happen. Sometimes we use prayer as a form of procrastination. We know we need to do the right thing, but we'll pray about it. Well, how long are you going to pray about it? God already has set up the situation for you. Stand up and do it already. Don't use prayer as a form of procrastination to delay your opportunity of integrity, to delay the reward, which is what's going to come next. Romance in the grain fields, as we see here in Ruth chapter 2, verse 14. We know Boaz had shown some interest in Ruth in chapter 2, verse 5. He had taken notice of her. He already had heard of her integrity. Kind of reminds me, before I met my wife, I had heard a lot of great things about her. I knew who she was, what she did. I was like, whoa, she's probably too much of a woman for me. I'm just a humble man. But then when I saw her, I knew her, I saw her, I was like, okay, now I can't turn back. This is going to be hard now for me to turn back. See, there's something about that. Boaz had shown some interest. He had heard about her. He was marveled at her. He even offered her lunch. And he didn't offer that to all the other women who were gleaning the fields, but he did offer her lunch. And now here we see that, right? Have some bread, dip it in the wine vinegar. And she sat and she ate all she wanted. She had some left over. But then, now, much later on in the grain fields, after the threshing harvest, she comes and following her mother-in-law's advice to lay down in the place where he was. It was a custom back then. I'm not going to get into it for the sake of time, but she trusted her mother-in-law. She didn't know anything about this. She was like, me, I'm going to go lay down next to this man. I don't know. I'm risking a lot here, risking my reputation. He might do something. I'm a foreigner, but she trusted her mother-in-law. Her mother-in-law said, go do this. And because of her love for her mother-in-law, because she was a woman of integrity, she said, okay, I will do this. And here we see how she proposes to Boaz. This is a proposal when she says, spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family. That was a proposal. Doesn't sound like, will you get married? But that, in fact, was a proposal of that day. She was calling Boaz her kinsman redeemer. And we're going to get into what that means later on. So Boaz responds, this kindness is greater than which you showed earlier. What was the earlier kindness? Well, the earlier kindness was what he had heard about what she did for her mother-in-law, how she accompanied her mother-in-law, how she was gleaning fields for her mother-in-law. But now Boaz sees her intent. She wants to preserve Elimelech's line, and she was putting herself on the line, not seeking younger men, because she apparently was a younger woman and she was quite attractive. So she didn't go after younger men. She wanted to preserve Elimelech's line by seeking Boaz, who was their kinsman redeemer, the only one who could do it. There was another one we know in the story. He kind of comes up, but Boaz kind of tries to convince him, and he is successful, and Boaz then got to be the guardian redeemer for that family. So he was touched by that she didn't seek somebody younger. So that, what does that tell us? That Boaz was an older man. Boaz wasn't expecting this young girl to seek him out. So he was touched by that, but it was more than that. He saw what Ruth's intent was. It wasn't about whether or not she was attracted or there was any romance, although that probably spark could have been there. But it was, I'm going to preserve Elimelech's line. Somebody who is not even related to me. Somebody who's not even my family. But I love Naomi so much. I'm going to be, you and I, we're going to preserve this lineage. And God honored that tremendously. See, that shows us that God provides for those who walk honorably before him, because God seeks to establish a lineage of integrity. When you want to do the right thing, God will align things in your path, because you're not seeking to do things for your own gain or just for you, but you're seeking something greater than you. And God is pleased with such things when you do selfless things, because you're not doing them just for you. You're doing them to glorify God. And this is how we recognize, brothers and sisters, that when we're in a situation, when God is setting us up for integrity and the world seems like ashes all around us, if we are people of integrity, we don't lose sight of the fact that it's not about me. We're not like, oh, why is this happening to me? And why did this have to happen to me? And why am I in this situation? If your mentality is that way, you're going to seek self-preservation. Whatever comes your way, or whatever your two hands can put together for self-preservation, and you're going to miss the opportunity for blessing. You're going to miss God's blessing. But when you realize that out of the ashes, God can make something great and something new, that it's not just about you, that it's about your future heritage, that it's about your lineage, it's about godly heritage, then God is going to make sure that you stand up and that you shine. Remember what Exodus 34:7 says. He maintains love to thousands of generations, forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. And so we see here at the end of Ruth chapter 4, verse 14 through 17, everybody's happy. Everybody goes home happy after this. The women there said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord. This day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous through Israel. And then verse 16 says, Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. And they said, Naomi has a son. Why Naomi has a son? because it was Naomi's lineage that was being preserved here. Ruth simply stepped in place of Naomi to continue Elimelech's line. And that's what Boaz, that's what so impressed Boaz, that Ruth was willing to put herself in that place. That is called standing the gap. And that's what a person of integrity does. And they named him Obed, and he was the father of Jesse and the father of David. So Ruth is in Naomi's place. Ruth blessed Naomi by her loyalty. And everybody goes home happy. Naomi gets another son. Ruth gets a loyal and a kind husband. Boaz gets a faithful and an honorable wife. And God immortalizes all these honorable people in the lineage of the Messiah. As we see here in Matthew 1:5, Salmon, the father of Boaz. And guess who Boaz's mother was? The one and only Rahab. And who's Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed, the father of Jesse, so on and so forth. So that brings us to 3 Gentile women in the lineage of David and Christ: Tamar, Rahab, and Ruth. You know, people nowadays, they're looking for a strong female lead in a movie, right? They always want a strong female character. Well, guess what? There was one in Ruth all along. Not one, but 3. Right here in the Bible. You can't beat these women of integrity that God sought to honor so much, he included them in the heritage and in the lineage of Jesus Christ. You remember Tamar, right, from Genesis 38. Without Tamar, Judah's lineage would be nowhere. She was the one actually who allowed it to continue. And now Ruth, without Ruth, there would be no lineage again. It would be zilch. But she stepped in place of Naomi and continued right on through. Wow. Comes to practical application number 4. Don't just look to yourself. Look towards your future. Look towards your legacy. Real self-preservation is selfless. Remember what Jesus said? If you seek to save your life, you will lose it. But if you lose your life, you will save it. See, real self-preservation, it's not just about me, but it's about my legacy. And that requires me to be selfless, to understand that it's about preserving a godly heritage. My life, it's not just about the success I bring to myself, but the success I bring to my family and to all those around me. Life is not about getting rich. It's not about accumulating things or about being healthy, but it's about enriching those around me and enriching my heritage. Remember, riches on earth cannot be inherited permanently, but a godly life has promise for eternity. So here I summarize the 4 practical applications. Sometimes we think we're finished, but God is actually getting started. Recognize if God has put you in a position to demonstrate integrity, your faith will follow through or will be lacking. Talk often goes unnoticed, but people notice selfless action. Don't just look to yourself, look towards your legacy. How do we see Christ in Ruth? Well, in Ruth, we see here an authentic love story taking place in the harshest of times, giving us reasons to always be hopeful, no matter what is happening around us. Isn't it funny that God chose that particular time for this story to take place, and he immortalized it in the book of Ruth, always showing us that no matter what is happening, no matter how many others may be lacking in integrity around us, one person can step up and change everything. Right? We also see a shadow in Ruth, a shadow of the ultimate love story between God and man, Christ and the church. The Hebrew word goel is used 23 times in the book of Ruth. This word is variously translated as guardian or kinsman or avenger or redeemer. And Boaz was the one who, because of his near kinship to Ruth, to Naomi, had the right to redeem, the responsibility to raise up the seeds to a deceased brother, and the solemn duty to avenge the murder of his kinsman, if that were so. Of the 118 times that the word Goel is used in the Old Testament, 23 of those times, that's 20%, is used in the book of Ruth, because Jesus is our kinsman redeemer. He's our avenger. He's our guardian redeemer. He has bought us back, like we sing. I've been redeemed. By what? By the blood of the Lamb. Why? Because I was sold to the world. I was dead, without any heritage, without any life at all, without any hope, sold to be dead, and a slave to sin. But Jesus bought me back with his own blood, as 1 Corinthians 6:19 and 20 says. He had to be made like us, though, in order for that to happen, because he had to be our kinsman. And that's why the Hebrew author said that he was made like us in every way, becoming our older brother, so that he could have the right to buy us back and get us back into this inheritance that we had lost because of our sinful estate. He renewed our access to the tree of life, to paradise, to claim our rightful place as the children of God. That's what his death, burial, and resurrection are all about. He now, when we get baptized in him, as Romans chapter 6, verse 3 and 4, when we realize that and we renounce our individual life, like Ruth did, I renounce myself, and now your people will be my people, your God will be my God. When we renounce our citizenship of the world and recognize that Jesus is buying us back, we do so when we get baptized. We die to self. We're buried with Christ, die with him, buried with him, and raised up with him to live in newness of life. We now are enabled to raise up godly seed, to continue a godly heritage, as 1 Corinthians 7:14 says. No longer now are we bearing fruit to sin and creating more sinful people, but now creating a godly heritage that can shine the light in this dark world. He purified us from the deeds that lead to death, so now we can influence this land for good. He has set us free from sin and its effect. But Jesus also avenged our death. He's our avenger. He's the true avenger, avenging our death, as Colossians chapter 2, verse 15 says. That's point number 3 up there. It says here, and having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. He disposed and disarmed all the powers of evil. True, there is evil here all around us. There's a realm of evil that is constantly working against you. But they've been disarmed for the child of God. They have no influence on you. Oh, they can try and deceive you. They can try and make you think that you're part of this reality. But we know better, because we've been redeemed, and we understand that those forces are disarmed. They no longer have any power over us. Jesus not only tied the hands of the devil for now, but there will be a day on Judgment Day when we will be fully avenged, and Satan will be thrown in the lake of fire, along with all those who have opposed God and supported his regime. He has represented us in the ultimate legal capacity when we were unable to. This is why he is the only mediator between God and man. That's what we call our guardian mediator. 1 John chapter 2, verse 1 says, I write this to you so that you will not sin, but if anybody does sin, we have an advocate. Jesus has become our advocate, our guardian. You didn't have any legal representation. As a matter of fact, you didn't have any right to any legal representation. I'm not talking about these puny little courts here in human land. I'm talking about the ultimate court, right? The only real court that exists. Because we sold ourselves to sin, we had sold away that right. But Jesus stepped in our place while we were still his enemies and gave us a divine legal representation in the eyes of the judge and bought us back. And basically gave us a get out of jail free card. The only one that exists. He did that. That's why we sing, we are redeemed. We have an advocate. Paul will tell Timothy, there is one God and one mediator between God and mankind, the man Jesus Christ. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5. Let me ask you this question. If you had to go to court here in New York State, would you hire a lawyer that is not recognized by the bar of New York State? Would you do that? Would you shoot yourself in the foot before a judge and hire a lawyer that the judge wouldn't even recognize? I don't think you would do that. And I don't think you would try to represent yourself either in a big case. Maybe in a small claims court you could represent yourself. And I know I'm talking about a case where you would be accused of murder or something else. Well, brothers and sisters, if we wouldn't do that in a little human court, what makes you think that you would want to do that on Judgment Day? You cannot represent yourself on Judgment Day. There's only one that can represent you, your guardian redeemer, your kinsman redeemer, your avenger. Jesus is the only one, as we read in Revelation 6:10. How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood? Jesus is the only advocate that the Father recognizes. Who is your advocate? Who do you have on your behalf? How are you going to stand before the throne at the end of the age? And I'll leave you with this passage. God is just. He will pay back trouble to those who trouble you and give relief to you who are troubled, and to us as well. This will happen when the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven in blazing fire with his powerful angels. He will punish those who do not know God and do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. They will be punished with everlasting destruction and shut out from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his might on the day he comes to be glorified in his holy people and to be marveled at among all those who have believed. And that includes you, because you believed our testimony to you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much for listening. I hope the Lord gave you insight into conforming to Jesus with today's message. I always appreciate feedback. You can send me your thoughts, musings, and comments directly through the Anchor app. You can also contact me on Twitter at kingdom_saint. Walk with the Lord today and be a blessing.